Please be seated. Our program will begin momentarily. Please welcome the founder and host of Climate One, Greg Dalton.
Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. This is the final frontier. I'm Greg Dalton, host and producer of the Climate One podcast, and delighted to be here talking to you about the next frontier. We heard earlier from Mary Nichols about the importance of the transport sector. I get to interview a lot of people at Climate One in lots of different industries, lots of different brands, many of them consumer-facing, much more accessible. Today we're going to talk about some brands that operate in industries where the technology, the policy drivers are a little more difficult. We've been inspired by the leadership taking place among cities and states and businesses to get to 100% renewable power and other ambitious goals, yet we know that heavy-duty transport, shipping, industry, and others are not part of the conversation oftentimes as center as those other industries. In this session, we will feature government and industry leaders representing sectors who face some of the toughest economics of decarbonization and set a vision of the new normal for heavy industry and transport. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeremy Oppenheim, who's Program Director of the Energy Transitions Commission, and he will tell us why this transition is essential and possible. Please welcome Jeremy Oppenheim.
What do I do? Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to talk about what is one of the really critical challenges that tends to get less time and attention than the power sector, than even land use. And it is the challenge of really taking on some of these hard-to-abate sectors, the heavy industrial sectors, the long-distance transport sectors, where already the emissions from those sectors are something like 20 to 25% of total emissions. And these are emissions that are not budging. It's not just that we have a bit of renewable power and we can shift them easily into a low-carbon version of themselves. But there's a huge, huge challenge in decarbonizing those sectors. And if we are going to hit a zero carbon economy by 2050, then we have to make dramatic progress from more or less a standing start on cement, on steel, on petrochemicals, on all this heavy stuff, and then also on the long-distance travel, whether it is aviation, whether it is trucking, shipping. These are all sectors which are essentially using upgraded versions of technology that have been around for many, many decades. So there is an enormous challenge of taking these sectors and turning them into the future industries that we want. There is an incredible opportunity at the same time, and that opportunity is in part on the supply side, in part by taking these technologies, these core elements of our economy, and that are at the heart of the political economy. Let us not forget that the industrial sectors and the transport sectors are central to the way in which we manage our overall modern economy. So there's an enormous challenge on the supply side to decarbonize them in terms of the way in which the core products get created. There's also an enormous opportunity around the demand side. And the Energy Transitions Commission, which is a group of 35 organizations of many different sizes and shapes that I lead, has been right at the heart of developing an approach to the decarbonization and the strategies needed to decarbonize these hard-to-abate sectors. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be completing the work of the Energy Transition Commission. We will lay out a comprehensive roadmap for how the 10 gigatons that are represented in the heavy industry and in the transport sectors can really go from 10 to 0 over the next 30 to 40 years and be at the heart of driving the overall shift to a low-carbon economy. And we're going to make the case that not only is this possible, but that the economics of this are entirely viable and that this is an attractive set of opportunities for industrial transformation. So you're going to see coming out of the Energy Transitions Commission a story of real possibility and deep, fundamental, structural change in key elements of our economy, and elements, as I say, that sit at the heart of some of the political tensions in terms of how we actually move from where we are today to the vibrant, dynamic, innovative economies that we want to see over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and making low carbon an engine for that innovation, both on the supply side and particularly, interestingly, on the demand side. What I'm going to do is invite three panelists to come and join us on the stage. And I'm going to move from, if you will, laying out the thesis of the 10 gigatons and getting to 0 and the potential for this fundamental innovation, supply and demand to play out, and invite our speakers to come and actually share their experiences of what that means on the ground in Europe, in the Netherlands, in Germany, and then a wonderful piece of innovation coming out of North America. So can I please invite our three speakers to come and join us? If you go into seat 2. So if you all come up on stage, that would be great. So just very quickly, let me introduce them. So we have Minister Pinkwart, and let me make this, get this absolutely right. Minister of Economic Affairs, Innovation, Digitalization, and Energy of Northern Rhine-Westphalia in Germany. And I think it's really important, right, to recognize, I mean, I got a small lecture from the minister before the start of the session on the fact that there was a deliberate, conscious choice to bring these different elements of a modern economy together, that you cannot do the transformation that we need without combining energy and digital and innovation and all these features. So I'm delighted to have you here with us. We have Dr. Itosha Cave. Did I get that right?
That's right. Perfect.
Fantastic. Who is the co-founder and chief science officer of Opus 12. And in a moment, you're going to explain to us why Opus 12 and what does it do and how it's going to change everything. And then we have Stijntje van Veldhoven, who is the Minister of Environment for the Netherlands. And we all, I think, we're always all in awe of what the Netherlands does, right, in terms of really showing leadership in multiple aspects of how to build a modern economy. And so we're going to turn to you. And in fact, I might even start with you, if that's all right. And then as I start with you, I'm then going to sit down. I'm going to make this transition from standing to sitting. And what I mentioned in my opening remarks is that if we're going to take particularly these industrial sectors and transform them in very powerful ways to deliver the services that we want, but not necessarily all the material intensity of those services, we're going to have to think about this from the supply side. But perhaps as important, if not more so, we're going to have to think about it from the demand side and how we move to a much more circular economy. And I think that that's something that you are absolutely driving with conviction in the Netherlands. So help us understand what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed. We have to move to a circular economy, because otherwise, if we're going towards a world with 10 billion people, and we want all of those people to be able to live a better life, we're going to have an enormous increase in the use of resources. So to achieve the Paris Agreement, we have to look beyond energy also to resources. Carbon is not a problem, but the way that we produce carbon right now in the form of CO2 gases, that is the problem. We have to start reusing those Cs. In the Netherlands, we're taking a structured approach to this, because we see wonderful examples of the circular economy throughout our economy, but there are small steps everywhere. We need a structural approach to speed up and scale up, including heavy industry. So what we are doing in the Netherlands is we have made, with all of those companies in important sectors, transition agendas. So with the sectors themselves, we have identified what is needed to get to this circular economy, and we are currently translating that, after I've sent a government-wide brief to Parliament, translating that into concrete action agendas. Every year I'm going to report to Parliament, so we're going to be monitoring, we're going to invest in innovation, and we're going to invest in education. We're also going to be monitoring our progress, so as to make sure that we do, in a structured approach throughout the economy, help also heavy industry in doing that. And we see wonderful examples. We see that a company like Tata Steel, you talked about steel production, is working together with Dow Chemicals, a large chemical company, to see if they can use waste gases and make plastic from that, so as to avoid having to use virgin fossil fuel oil to produce plastics from.
And is that profitable to do that?
Well, not yet. But I think for many of the business cases that I have seen, on the first, you may have an initial investment that needs to be made, and then there's innovation to be done. But then at some point, if you close the circle, then you can have the business case. Recently, a large 150 million investment was announced in the port of Rotterdam on a business case that does turn around, which is a circular steam project, which uses wastewater streams, separates them, uses the gases, and then sells the remaining salts to other companies. So we see many opportunities which already have business cases. So I'm very positive about how this agenda can really transform also our heavy industries.
So thank you. And so let me turn, Natasha, to you. And we've had one example about taking waste gases from Tata Steel and playing with them into the petrochemical sector with Dow Chemicals. Does that relate to what Opus 12 does? Help me understand kind of how this fits together.
Yeah, so it relates quite strongly. So at Opus 12, we basically created this company to ask the question, can we find a profitable path to use carbon dioxide? And so we basically have looked to scale up what is mine and my co-founder Kendra's research that we did at Stanford University, where we found these metal catalysts that can be combined with electricity. And when you flow carbon dioxide and water over these metal catalysts in the presence of electricity, they'll break down into smaller atomic bits. Mm-hmm. And then the metal catalyst will reform those atomic bits into new molecules. And these new molecules are anything from the fuel that you put into your car, to components that are in plastic, to components that are used to make other products, such as fertilizers and semiconductor chips. And what's unique about our approach, where we can get the profitability, is that we're starting small, in the smaller market, where we can make a specialty gas that is used and we can get really high margins. And then as we start to scale up to the larger scale, where the margins are much smaller, but the market is much larger, we can improve our performance along the way to where we can compete with petroleum products.
But the module that you're describing, it doesn't require a vast industrial complex. It's much smaller, is it?
Correct, yeah. So our first commercial product will be about the size of a dishwasher. And to give you a sense of how powerful that just reactor can be is the main component of it, the heart and soul, which is what we make, can fit in the palm of your hand. And that has the CO2 conversion power of about 700 trees that you would just be holding in your hand, and it would fit in something the size of a dishwasher. And then we would scale up to something that would be the size of a whole plant. And then you're putting an entire dense forest. At that scale, you could have a suitcase-sized system that would be about 37,000 trees within the size of a suitcase. So really powerful CO2 conversion machines that we can put in very small spaces.
And do you need a CO2 price for this to make money in the first applications, or is the specialty gas so high margin that you can do this just by providing, the CO as an input without any additional support?
Correct, yeah. In fact, we build into our cost model a price for carbon dioxide. So we expect to pay the customer for their CO2 or to pay to have CO2.
Oh, wow, you're going to pay them for the CO2.
Yeah, that's our cost model. We'll certainly take it for free.
Yeah, take it for free. Anybody who's got some, they'll take it for free.
Yeah, we'll take it for
good.
sure. But to be conservative in our cost model, we build a cost. Our actual largest cost is the electricity.
Right.
And so we definitely see this world in which we're building an abundance, and we'll have a surplus amount of renewable electricity that we can use to make our products. And so that's very important at the large scale to have really cheap renewables that are available. And I feel more confident that, at least in California, we will certainly have this surplus renewable electricity that we can tap into that will be really cheap because it's in excess. Abundance.
Fantastic. So this is a wonderful, wonderful example of the kind of innovation that we need to see. And it's bringing renewable energy together with modern chemistry at a small scale and really doing something quite dramatic. Let's talk about, let me get this right, North Rhine-Westphalia.
Wonderful.
Right, North Rhine-Westphalia. Right.
Oh, we are neighbors.
Right, you're neighbors, right? You're best mates, I'm sure. What are you doing? What's the kind of, how are you taking the circular economy approach as the core of what you're doing? Or are you going about this in just a slightly different way? Just help us understand.
Have also the circular economy in our view. That's a must, I would say. But we have a lot of energy-intensive industries in North Rhine-Westphalia. More than 250,000 employees are working in these industries, and the revenues per year are 330 billion euros in this business, and they are very important.
What kind of industries are these?
Sorry?
What kind of industry?
Yeah, steel industry, chemical industry, glass industry, the aluminium industry, and so on. And they depend on affordable energy prices, and on the one hand. On the other hand, their processes are combined with a high percentage of CO2 emissions. And on the other hand, they are very important for our renewable industries, like wind energy needs steel and all the other fundamental materials they produce. So if you look to the circular economy and the high recycle quotation of recycling of steel materials, this industry is not that bad, but they are confronted with CO2 emissions, and this makes maybe a difference from Europe to other parts of the world, that in Europe you have to pay, or you have to buy CO2 certificates, and you have to pay an increasing amount of money for the CO2 certificates. So it's for the industry in the long run not easy to stay in Europe in the future because they have to pay high energy prices. Germany has more or less the highest energy prices in the world, and they have to pay the high certificate prices. So the industry will come under pressure.
Right.
And what we want to make sure is that we want to have the climate change, that we can fight against climate change by reducing the carbon emission with industry in the future and not against industry in the future. And if we want to reach this, we have to make sure that our industry can go through a real deep transformation process. And therefore, incremental innovation are not enough, what they have done all the time before. A lot of innovation. But that's not enough for the future. So what we have to work on, Netherlands, the same as North Rhine-Westphalia, Germany, and other industrial parts of Europe, we have to think about disruptive innovations in the industries so that their production processes can be changed fundamentally over time. And therefore, they need a lot of research. We need new prototypes. We have to implement the new prototype processes and to scale it up to real big size. And if you look to our steel industry, we have the biggest plants in the world in North Rhine-Westphalia. So you have to bring it from prototypes, the very small ones, to 1 million of tons per year. And that's exactly what we, as the state of North Rhine-Westphalia, together with the industry on the one hand and sciences of the other hand, what we are working on, and we started an initiative this week where we bring both sides together with the government to work on concrete projects in the next months and years where the industry can invest in transforming their own business.
And just if I can stay with you for a bit longer, I mean, these innovation cycles have typically been decades long for big process industries. They don't turn on a sixpence.
Yeah.
Right? How do we think about this? I mean, in truth, what we're going to have is maybe, I mean, I don't know whether the cycles of innovation in a steel industry or in some of the chemicals, can they be done fast enough? How do you change that cycle time dramatically?
They have to, you're absolutely right, but they are also doing it. If you discuss with steel industry, then you see that they invented the last 10 years 100 new steel types. So there is a lot of innovation in these industries. That's not the old industry anymore. That's a real new one. And they are doing research on the atomistic basis, looking for the atoms, redesigning their steel products to meet also the new market needs, looking to electromobility. What are the car producers looking for? They need very strong material, which is very light. So the steel industry has to think about new steel products, and that's exactly what they are doing. So there is a very high innovation degree. On the other hand, the plants you can't shift that often. So what we are now thinking on is how to adapt the plants during their normal investment cycle, which is 20 years, maybe 25 years. And they come now with proposals that they can adapt these plans to new technologies in a 5-10 years framework, because we want to reach the Paris Agreement 2030. So we have to work very fast in Europe and around the world. And if we don't shift our industries much faster, I'm sure we can't meet these goals we have set.
So I want to challenge each other a little bit in some of this, because otherwise it's no fun. So on the one hand, your large steel companies, they kind of need to have confidence about the future, and yes, they know it's going to be a lower carbon future, but if they're going to make massive investments in innovation, they need to know that there's going to be a market for these products.
That's true.
And then on the other hand, I have our Minister of Environment saying, well, you know what, the real answer is, at least in part, cutting demand. We're going to drive this circular economy, and we may only need half the steel per unit of GDP than we've traditionally required. How do these two things fit together? These guys need to know that there's going to be lots of demand for their really smart steel, and you're desperately cutting demand for it, left, right, and center. Walk me through how these two things fit together.
Well, they fit together perfectly.
Excellent.
Because we are,
I knew that would be the answer.
That's, of course, that's the answer. Right. Because demand worldwide is growing so fast that we're only going to be able to meet it if we can make our economy much more efficient. And so one of the problems that we face today is that our economy is terribly inefficient. But that's also the good news, because that means there's lots of room for improvement. And that's why I think we can really meet the demand which is growing worldwide. Think about all those people in Asia and Africa which are coming to our world, but which are also getting more wealthy, demanding more products. So we will need to do it this way, otherwise we will not have the resources within the constraints of the Paris Agreement that we need to get all those products to all of those people. So I think it's a very positive agenda, which also for the industry, they know the world population is growing. They know that the world's population is getting, on average, more wealthy. So they know that the market is out there. And as government, I think in the initial phase, we can also play an important role in subsidizing innovation, in stimulating demonstration projects, but also through our public procurement, we can make a difference. I'm from the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, so we build a lot of roads and bridges. If we build a bridge with 50% less cement, we save 70% of the CO2. And imagine all the roads and bridges that are being built in the world today. So we can cut our emissions enormously if we go towards this circular economy, and then we can provide more roads and more bridges and more products to all of those people around the world that are awaiting them.
Natasha, when you hear this, you're hearing two, European policy leaders describing a quite complex transition with, established industries and complicated supply chains, and we're going to get all these things to move. Do you go, that's the right way forward, or do you go, that's never going to work? What we need to do is take a much more disruptive approach. This is not going to come by reforming the old guys. It's going to come by Opus 12, Opus 13, Beethoven's 7th, that we're going to have a whole series of really disruptive new guys come in and blow these old companies apart. What's your honest view on this?
So my view is actually...
Chatham House rules. There's, I'm sure, no press in the room.
Well, I actually think we need both types of approaches. I mean, we do rely on...
You could be a politician. Fantastic answer.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, we rely on government grants. I mean, when we first got started, no VC wanted to even really consider us. We had too much technical risk. And so we looked to philanthropic and government support. And now we've been able to attract investors now that we have a very clear business case, we have a prototype that works, we have a manufacturing partner. We've de-risked things sufficiently. But the federal government, through the National Science Foundation, through NASA, through Department of Energy, they were our biggest supporters. And they truly, really are a huge venture capital space for us and have really built a lot of the fundamental disruption that has happened. And we also see them also as we become larger to bring the policy that we need to really create the synergistic sort of circular economy where we can take those emissions and there's a space for them. And so I get really optimistic when I hear all of these different policy discussions going on, even though I like to just listen and not necessarily...
Who wants to have Opus 12? Do you want them in the Netherlands or you want them in...
Yeah, I like to...
Welcome anytime.
That was exactly what I thought about. So we can invite you, not for subsidies, but maybe for customers, getting customers in Germany, in North Rhine-Westphalia, because I'm sure that our industry would need such technologies in the future, and we should collaborate, because we are exactly looking for these disruptive technologies which are necessary, the carbon-to-chem approach which we have in North Rhine-Westphalia, or that we have new technologies to use not carbon anymore for the reduction process in steel plants, but we substitute it by hydrogen, also getting from the renewable industries. Yeah. So I would say that your model could fit our interests very well. And if you look to the increasing prices of CO2, there can be also a business model that you get money from the industry who can reduce
25
CO2
euros,
emissions
25
by
euros.
your machine.
Absolutely.
So I think that can be a profitable business in the future.
We're now over 25 euros a ton in Europe, so you should move.
Yeah,
we should.
Rapidly.
We take you
Yay,
with
for
us.
25. We have 1 minute 49 seconds. Quick last thoughts from each of you to wrap up the panel. Minister van Veldhoven.
Well, I think we need cooperation, and I think we need innovation. So thanks very much for sharing your great ambition with us too. And we look very much forward with everybody to further cooperate on bringing the circular economy further achieving the Paris Agreement goals.
Etosha. Yeah, so Buckminster Fuller put it best when he said pollution is just the resource that we are not harvesting. I paraphrase that. And I really want to challenge us all to rethink about the way we look at carbon dioxide, to see it as a resource instead of something that we just haphazardly throw away.
That's Pinkhouse.
Yeah, I think that our panel was a good example that also in industries, if we want to change faster, we need startups like your startup. We need openness for innovation, and we need new business models for the industry, that they really can shift faster and have an incentive for doing it. And what we see in North Rhine-Westphalia, and maybe we can also have it in other parts of the world, the industry can be a real driver of decarbonization if we offer them models and also support to start a fundamental shift in the upcoming months and years.
So I think what I hope people take from the panel is a couple of things. One is that there is an enormous opportunity in the industrial space. I mean, I think it has been ignored to a large extent by the policymakers. Everyone gets jazzed about renewable power, and so do I, right? And we need it desperately, and we need to scale it even faster. But there's an incredible wealth of know-how and talent and scientific-driven innovation that's beginning to play out in the industrial sectors, and that can not just be, if you will, something that is no longer a problem, right? That it ceases to be something that we have to worry, but it can become a huge part of the solution.
Yeah.
Right, because as Etosha was describing, we can take CO2 and we can actually turn it into a value stream rather than a waste stream. So there's a huge opportunity in all of this. Second thing I want everyone to take away is that we need this incredible partnership between the government, the academic community, the business community, finance. This doesn't happen. I mean, you talked about a triple helix, I think, right? This does not happen. The structural transformation that we're describing requires a really deep and quite powerful coordination between different players. And that itself will be fundamental institutional innovation if we're going to get this right. And the last thing I'm going to say is that this is something that can't wait 5, 10, 15 years, or we'll kick this can down the road and hope that everything else happens and then we'll deal with this in the 2030s. The time frame for transformation of these sectors is honestly very long. Right? The plant lives are long. The restructuring processes are complicated, not just from an asset-based point of view, but from a customer application point of view and from a talent point of view. So we've got to get going on this with conviction and authority now. With that, let me thank the panelists. I'm sorry I've made a mess of their names on a number of occasions, but I've tried really hard, and it's been a really great content-based conversation. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for that engaging discussion. Now we're going to keep moving. It's my pleasure to introduce Janet Lampkin. She's the new regional president of United Airlines. She's going to talk to us from the podium. Janet Lampkin.
Good afternoon. I'm very proud to be speaking here today on behalf of my 90,000 colleagues all around the world. Today is a very big day for United Airlines. It's a history-making day for us, and we can't think of a better time or place to share the news that we believe will not only change our airline, but the industry as well. Simply put, our goal is to be the most environmentally conscious airline in the world. And to help achieve that goal, today, United Airlines is the first U.S. airline to make a public commitment to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, a 50% reduction by the year 2050. Achieving that goal would eliminate 21 million metric tons of CO2 in the atmosphere per year, or the equivalent of 4.5 million cars off the road. That's all the cars in Los Angeles and New York City combined. And to celebrate this historic commitment, tomorrow we will mark another industry first as we operate the longest transatlantic biofuel flight to date from our hub here in San Francisco to Zurich. United is the first U.S. carrier. United is the first U.S. carrier to take this ambitious step. We look forward to seeing the rest of the industry catch up and make similar commitments to sustainability. Of course, many people will wonder how we're going to achieve that goal, and I'm very happy to say that we are well on our way to making it happen. Currently, we invest over $2 billion per year in new, more fuel-efficient aircraft. Each new aircraft reduces emission 15 to 20% compared to the prior generation. We recently retired the gas-guzzling Boeing 747, replacing it with a more fuel-efficient, longer-range aircraft. And though we'll never forget that airplane, we'll fly into the future with the assurance that each new aircraft will be cleaner than the last. And to service those new aircraft, we are converting our ground fleet to electric power. We've already converted 2/3 of our eligible ground fleet here in California, which is great progress. But it's what we put into our aircraft that really provides us with the next opportunity to minimize our footprint. That's why we are setting the standard for investments in sustainable aviation biofuels. This investment is not only good for the environment, but it also has the potential to guard against future oil prices instability, while creating clean energy jobs in the communities where we all work and live. The Zurich flight tomorrow will use renewable jet fuel supplied to us through our partnership with World Energy, a refinery based right here in California that converts feedstocks into low-carbon biofuel, cutting CO2 emissions by over 60% on a life cycle basis. Since 2016, United has purchased more biofuel than any other airline in the world. Going forward, we made the very largest and largest in the industry aviation fuel purchase agreement with Fulcrum Bioenergy, another California firm pioneering the technology to literally turn household trash into jet fuel. Through this agreement, we're responsible for more than 50% of the airline industry's future commitments to biofuel. And though we are very proud to lead the industry, we hope that other carriers see the benefits of biofuels and that they provide not only to our airline, but to the planet that we all call home. Our efforts to be the greenest airline in the industry is really about the future of our business and of all of our skies. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in this transformational event. We look forward to making history together.
Now I'd like to introduce our panel. Stella Lee is Senior Vice President at BYD Company. Stella Lee. And John Konerup-Bong is Head of Sustainability Strategies and Shared Value Initiatives at Maersk.
Hello. Hi.
And Allard Kastelein is President and CEO of the Port of Rotterdam Authority. I'll be here.
Thank you that way.
How about there? There we go.
Okay,
Fabulous.
now.
Thank you. All right. Well, welcome all. As I said in the beginning, I get to interview a lot of people in a lot of different sectors, consumer-facing, food. A lot of them have a lot more easier technology, been further in the sustainability. Janet, I'd like to begin with you. 50% by 2050 sounds good, and yet I think we all agree that we need to go faster. Auto companies increased cafe efficiency, mileage efficiency by 50% in maybe a decade. I know the airlines, and you're new to United Airlines, came from Bank of America. Is that as fast as the airlines can go? 50% by 2050?
It is as fast as we can go. And of course, as I mentioned, as you referenced, we are leading that effort. It's more challenging in our industry than many of those other industries. Some of the technologies just aren't ready for our equipment at this stage, so it is. And believe me, this is a high priority for us, so we are leading the way and moving fast.
And when you think about the brand of United, I know you're trying to reposition the brand. Do people care about this when they buy an airline ticket? Sustainability, American, United, Continental. Is green part of that purchasing decision?
I think people do care who they're doing business with, and we're committed to creating a top-level experience for our customers and the actual operation, but I think they do care that we are the leader in environment.
John Konerup-Bong, ships and planes are often, obviously, very international outside the jurisdictions of the nation-state system that underlines the Paris Agreement. A lot of voluntary or kind of consensus-based organizations. Who do you think is more sustainable, ships or airplanes? Who's greener?
Well, there's no doubt that ships are more sustainable in the sense that we emit 2 to 3% of global emissions, but move 80% of global trade. So shipping is a very efficient way of moving goods and people. However, of course, we emit 2 to 3%, so we need to reduce as well.
And so we're the biggest progress, and also for ships and planes, it comes down to the fuel. That's the biggest thing. So what are you trying to do there? What are you doing there to kind of get that cleaner fuel, greener fuel, to move all that global trade, which despite the tariffs, I think is going to continue to grow?
Well, I mean, for the last 10 to 15 years, what we have been doing is really pushing fuel efficiency because the opportunities have been great. There's been a cost driver, so there's been an internal driver that goes directly on the bottom line, and we have reduced our emissions by 43% since 2007 per container move, so it's still an intensity. But it's a huge leap, and we lead the industry by 10% on average. However, it's very clear that to go all the way to be aligned with the Paris temperature goals, and the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, in April actually made an agreement that now means that shipping has an absolute target of reducing at least 50% by 2050, and that will not be possible by efficiency alone, so we need to innovate and find new fuels.
So they did an international industry deal after airlines did, right? So shipping came second, airlines got there first. Let's add Allard Kastelein in terms of what ports are doing. Is this a burden? You're partnering with lots of shipping companies. Tell us where the business case is strongest, getting greener ports.
There's, I think, a tremendous opportunity still to improve on the existing efficiency of the supply chain. If we look at the opportunities digitization, the Internet of Things provides us with the transparency in the full journey from, if you like, the port of departure to the port of arrival, optimization of speed, optimization of processes, a pilot, a tugboat, a quay wall, taking on clean water, bunker fuels, cargo, etc., etc. We believe that there's an efficiency gain still out there of some 20%. We actually tested this with large shipping companies like Maersk, but also MSC, Shell, and others. And just the mere optimization provides us with an opportunity for further efficiency gains of some 20%, including thus CO2 emissions. So that's one. I think the other thing, indeed, then the next generation will have to be about cleaner fuels, whether that's synthetic fuels, or whether it's battery powered for shorter distances, or whether it's hydrogen. But those are the innovations that will need to take place in order to truly decarbonize the entire industry altogether.
Stella Lee, you're kind of the disruptor up here. A lot of these companies have, huge amounts of capital sunk into established assets. So how are you going to disrupt shipping and perhaps airlines? Tell us what you're going to do with some of your batteries.
Yes, I think as a world pioneer for electric vehicle and also battery technology, we have products available to support. For example, start from airline. Maybe any ground equipment you can electrify. We have case running in Brazil, São Paulo. Some airline company is working with us, want to electrify 200 of their luggage tractor. Mm-hmm. So any equipment on the ground, we have technology can electrify. We start from here because that's the most polluted place. And then for shipping, I just have a brief chat with John in the back, saying for BYD, because we in our eyes is you have battery, you have motor, then you can replace everything is run by diesel, by the engine. So that means, for a very simple example, you put a several container of battery inside the ship, and then we start from the last 20 miles. You close to the harbor, you switch off the engine, you turn into electric mode, and then you are close to the local region where is most polluted. We care a lot of people living there. Then you're clean. We don't need. We maybe later on, 50, 20 years later, we worry about the long distance electrification. But to start with, a short distance, last 20 miles, and then go to the last 50 miles. So I think if we continue to do that, will help a lot. And then in the past 2 years ago, we delivered several yacht, a tractor and the dredge trucks to the LA port, Long Beach port, and also to Oakland and San Diego, and also running at the BNSF station. So initially our commitments running these trucks for 10 hours. But now our truck go there, per charge, we can operate for 20 hours. So in our effort, we see the people initially present to them, everybody saying, no, it's impossible to work. Because every electric car, the perception is a smaller version, you don't have enough power. So, but once we deliver this heavy duty trucks, class 8, then to show its work, then the people build up confidence. So
what about price? Because it's often thought to be a hurdle, is the price for electric.
Yeah, currently we have some challenge on price, but so that's the reason I'm so glad to hear, Port of Rotterdam, you're leading this electrification, but also you give some subsidy. But in California, we have the ARB money, so we have HVAP, so to give per trucks 150,000 US dollar for the first 100 trucks. That helped a lot. So our estimations, in the first maybe 1,000 trucks, you need some subsidy. But then after the industry grow to more than thousands, then the economic will start make sense. And also the people will see they save great money on maintenance. They save great money on the electricity in operation. And then the lifetime of the trucks can extend by 50%. At that time, you will see the total life cycle is workable. It's cheaper than the diesel.
John, we saw some protesters outside this morning. That's one kind of protest. There's also a lot of shareholders that are pressuring companies. Your company is owned and controlled by a family. Do some of those pressures, shareholder pressures, does that actually help you do your job?
Yes, I think it does. I do think that one of the groups in the whole economy that has reacted the most after the Paris agreements is actually the investor community. I think we've seen a rapid scale-up of, you can say, investor activism in a soft way. We're on the CAE 100+ list of carbon-intensive companies. And so we have a couple.
That's the 100 most intensive carbon emitters.
Yes, which we're actually not if you look at the metrics. So I think they've also chosen the companies to balance out the sectors. But that's absolutely fine. We are carbon intensive. We want to decarbonize. We've done 43% so far, and we're on a journey in the long term to full decarbonizations, that's for sure. But we have them on our AGM, asking questions. We have a very good dialogue, but I do think that this dialogue between companies and investors are helping the cause.
Jen, how about at United? I know you're new there, but there's clearly oil companies have felt pressure. Wall Street, BlackRock is now saying you got to be sustainable as a business. How are shareholders feeling that at United?
Well, in our view, shareholders want a sustainable company, first and foremost, profitable and sustainable. And our efforts towards sustainability, climate sustainability emissions, is part of that whole effort. We purchase about 4 billion gallons of fuel every year. It is our second highest expense, and it is the most unreliable, unpredictable expense. So anything we do to reduce those emissions translates into less costs and an easier expense to manage. And that is a very good, clear business rationale for it. The other component of it is what you referenced before. We believe customers want to know not just what you do, but who you are. And they want to understand that we are making these efforts. And there's a lot of financial data that shows and talks about companies that are managed in a very sustainable way are more profitable and have better long-term outcomes. So for us, it makes great business sense. But frankly, it does go beyond that. It's really about sustainability and doing the right thing for the planet and our communities.
One thing I've long wondered in travel across the board, and this goes to airlines, Expedia, Travelocity, is why are the carbon offsets buried in the purchase price, the flow for a ticket? So try to find a carbon offset button when you buy an airline ticket. Now, you can debate offsets, and they're kind of murky, et cetera. But Janet, if there's nothing saying buy an offset, whether it's United, American, Travelocity, Expedia, or Orbitz.
We actually do quite a bit of that with our corporate customers. It's a very active engagement with them. And so at the I'd say, mass level or the larger level, it's very active. We're offering that as a service and giving our customers more data, frankly, than they have on their own. So it's working well at that level.
And that makes sense because Microsoft has an internal carbon price. When you fly at Microsoft, you've got to be thinking about that. So there's a business driver there, but there seems to be that retail consumers don't care.
They may care. I think many of them do care. I had an interesting conversation with one of our customers last night, actually, at dinner, who said the information we gave them about what their carbon footprint was illuminating, and they went back to work on it.
I bet that more teleconferences, perhaps. Allard, tell us about getting to zero, because we heard Governor Brown, the host of this conference, didn't get a whole lot of attention, but put out there California becoming a net zero state. Part of that would be ports becoming net zero. And I asked about, we know we need to get to zero. We heard earlier peaking by 2020, decarbonizing by 2050. We know decarbonization will happen, but it's about getting to zero fast enough.
Yeah, so this is going to be a long and winding story, right? First of all, I'm excited that today we've been able to announce that we've started the Global Ports Climate Action Program. So we've reached out, created a coalition of the willing, and together with these leading ports of the world, which is Long Beach, LA, Vancouver, Antwerp, Hamburg, Barcelona, and ourselves, we will collaborate to reduce the emissions by increasing the efficiencies through digitization, as I alluded to. But we also will collaborate to improve the deployment of renewable power to ships, accelerate the development of low-carbon fuels, and both our customers to the right will necessarily need those, and decarbonize the cargo handling activities in port, and then collectively seek to have the appropriate regulations to support this all. So that's related to ports in the transportation sector, if you like. Now, Rotterdam is, to some extent, potentially an exception to, or not entirely comparable to other ports, because we're also hosting the large industries of the country. We're accountable for some 20% of the total Dutch emissions. So if the 20% of industries that we host need to reach zero, then clearly we need to do a couple of things. First, between now and 2030, need to do what we already know and are capable of. So it's no use over the next 10 years waiting and sitting behind a spreadsheet and hoping for the great breakthrough, the silver bullet, because I don't believe it exists. And then after 2030, you need to indeed have conducted so much innovation and research that you can have a system change. So the system will go to electrification and hydrogen and all that. Now, what do I mean by reducing that profile and do what you know that you can already do? That's what we do in Rotterdam, is that we reach out to the industries that have a presence in the port area, and we ask them, how can we help? What can we do? How could we co-create, co-invest, create coalitions, whether it's a green lane, supplying the Heineken export brewery with residual heat from the port area, and having battery-powered inland vessels coming to the extensive big container terminals and ask Maersk to take the Heineken export beer to New York fueled by biofuels, or whether it is that we build a carbon capture open access network throughout the port area and invite all the industries that have a presence to just capture the CO2, deliver it to the fence, and we'll take away all of the concerns. So there's multiple approaches that we're taking in Rotterdam that will allow us to take the necessary steps to get a 49% reduction in 2030, and then to move on to the 95 to 100% reduction in 2050. But it is this combination of taking very many steps with many players throughout a very long period of time. I keep saying, anyone who is expecting to hear the silver bullet example is not real. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're making some very nice inroads already. Just in wrapping up,
pardon me for 1 second. We have 4 minutes left, and I want to get them also to get the zero. I'm feeling the urgency of zero here.
Yes.
So John, getting to zero at Maersk, do you see a path? Do you feel the urgency?
Feel the urgency, definitely. See a path, no. But what I think is really important now, it's great to celebrate all the efficiency efforts. We're going to continue to drive fuel efficiency. It's directly on the bottom line. It makes good business sense. But going to zero means completely disrupting the technology we use in our ships today. There is nothing market ready right now. So what we need to focus on is this interplay between the public and private sector. That we must not forget, now we have grid parity on solar panels almost everywhere in the world, but we didn't in the 90s. So the story of that was feed-in tariffs in Japan and Germany, especially at a certain point, China jumping on manufacturing, and then you saw halving the price year after year after year in the zeros. So every time you then get a policy like the feed-in tariffs, then technology and investment respond, then you strengthen the policy targets because it's become cheaper, then you get more investments into R&D and becomes even cheaper, so you can strengthen the policy target again. That's the kind of dynamic that we need to see in shipping and probably also in aviation. And the first step was the IMO agreement. It's not a voluntary agreement. It's a legally binding agreement. It's the parallel to the UNFCCC for shipping. It's a 50% absolute reduction goal. Can that be strengthened? Well, not now. But if you start to put in the measures and you see the scaled innovation, then the technology to go beyond efficiency is becoming cheaper. Then I guess in 10 years' time, you can probably strengthen that goal. So it's really this public-private dynamics that we need to have now.
Janet, you've pledged 50% by 2050. Is zero even, can you see it to zero? And I'll ask you also, there's a biofuel company that United's invested $30 million. Could you double or triple that to make it go a little faster?
Well, we're already doing more than 50% of what their capacity is. Mm-hmm. So we need more of the industry to join in on that to develop the demand for the capacity, I would say. But I think the point just made was really an important one. We're optimists, and we're working on it. So I'm going to say we can see it at some point in the future. But there has to be this interplay and this dynamic of government setting policies that create that kind of capital-intensive investment. The companies that we partner with in California, that wasn't by chance. They're in California because there is a set of guidelines, a framework that gives certainty to those capital investments and creates the opportunity for the investment. We need to see more of that, along with innovation, finding the new technologies, and collaboration within our industry and among industries.
Stella, how about you? It's a little easier from where you sit to see zero, right?
Yes, exactly. Actually, we see it's happening now. Then we should put an action plan, not 2030. Should put it next year and 2020. For example, like Shenzhen, electrify 100% is 15,000 buses by end of 2017. It's working perfect. And by end of this year, they will electrify 16,000 taxi, 100%. And then by March, we need to deliver 6,000 heavy-duty trucks to them to electrify all the construction trucks in the city. I believe in 2 years, all the heavy-duty or light-duty, middle-range duty trucks will be electrified 100%. So the fourth largest city in China, like Shenzhen, can do that. So then every place can do. So we just need a authorization, a government agency to put a schedule, to put the target date, but not 2040, 2050. Put something in next 3 years. We start from 10%, 20%, then the action will happen. For example, we deliver 18,000. Thank you. Yeah, because we can do it. Like in this year, we will deliver 18,000 buses. Then next year, we prepare capacity 30,000 buses and trucks. The capacity, you will boost the industry, and also you will create a local job. So, for example, in the past four years, BYD created 1,000 jobs in Los Angeles. So we have 800 is like a manufacturing job in California. So this is become like you can be green, you can be affordable, but also it's a local economic, local job. Yeah.
And the future is happening in Shenzhen and is coming to Los Angeles. So let's thank all of our panelists for their conversations today. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes. Thank you.
Now I'd like to welcome Helen Clarkson, who is the CEO of the Climate Group, to come up and make some remarks. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Greg. Well, that wraps up the afternoon. Thanks for those of you who've been with us all afternoon and those who've joined for some of the different sessions. We've heard how almost 400 global companies, healthcare providers, cities, states, and regions now have 100% renewable energy targets. We've heard how more than 60 CEOs, governors, premiers, and mayors from around the world have committed to work together to deliver 100% zero-emissions transport future. And those governments represent a population of over 237 million people and businesses with revenue of $470 billion. And we've heard how leaders in government and industry are taking bold steps to drive the transition to clean energy in these difficult-to-decarbonize sectors, including heavy-duty transport. And look out, we've got another announcement that will come out tomorrow, so just keep an eye out for that around infrastructure. And that's all I'm allowed to say, so a little teaser. The speakers we've heard from today are setting a standard for leadership on clean and healthy energy systems around the world. And we're at a turning point for making clean energy and transport the new normal, and are now acting on a new level of scale and ambition. But we're also operating at a new level of urgency and the need to combat the challenge of climate change. So these commitments we've announced this week here at the Global Climate Action Summit are for the long term. We're continuing to work with these leaders to deliver, and we invite you to join us and seize the opportunity of the clean energy economy. Thank you.